Hi, this is Rick from For Community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others and also with God. The other day, I was driving to Walmart with my girls, and one of them happened to clue in that I park in pretty much the same space every single time. It doesn't matter how full or empty the parking lot is. She noticed that I park around the same place every single time, so I had a chance to explain it to her. When I was younger, I did not do this, and I lived in Scarborough. And typically what happened in my early 20s is I'd go to some place like Scarborough Town Center, which is a huge parking lot, to go shopping there, or I'd jump on the LRT in order to get on the subway and not have to pay for parking. And I'd park everywhere and anywhere. And then at the end of the day, if I'm coming back from the subway or if I'm done shopping at that big mall, I wouldn't have a clue where I parked. I'd leave, I'd look around, and sometimes in my early 20s, I'd even think that somebody had stolen my car as I'm walking the perimeter of the entire shopping center, and finally I bump into it. And my car was never stolen a single time. It's just I just forgot where I parked. So I told my daughters that I choose to park around the same place every time because I'm trying to avoid a future where I am totally confused thinking my car was stolen. And of course, my daughters kind of giggled at that. I park in the same place every time because I'm creating a future for myself that I will appreciate, rather than creating a future for myself where I will be stressed out thinking that my car was stolen. Okay, do you know what I'm talking about? Do you also have these little habits that you do that make your life easier? Maybe not in the moment, but easier in the next day or in the next hour. If you've got a smart habit that you do to make your life in the future easier, please pause the video and share your story with whoever you happen to be watching with. This video is based on my interpretation of James chapter 3, verses 17 to 18, just 2 verses. In this passage, we read about doing things right now that will lead to a future experience that we're going to appreciate. James chapter 3, verses 17 to 18, "But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It's also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It's full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness." Here's what I'm going to try to talk about in this video based on this text. I want to talk about choices that lead to a future life that you want to live. The first thing that's jumping out to me about this passage actually isn't found in the passage at all. The first thing I notice is actually found in chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, which we didn't read. In chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, we read how our words can get us into trouble. Our words direct the course of our life, and our words steer us away from danger or toward danger. Our words move us closer to God or farther away from God. Essentially, our vocabulary and our discernment around how we use our vocabulary can either put us on a path of a fulfilling or enjoyable life, or it can put us on a path where we're in trouble a lot and we have a lot of problems. So that's the first thing that's jumping out just in these 2 verses. It's actually the first 12 verses that jump out to me. The next thing that jumps out to me about these 2 verses is also not in these 2 verses. It's in verses 13 to 16. We read about how jealousy and selfishness can destroy us. Jealousy and selfishness lead us away from living a life of honor where we can respect others and be respected by others, and lead us to a future of bad relationships and self-loathing, or at least a life that we find empty and not truly worth living. So that's the second thing that jumps out to me. It's not even in the passage. And then we have this passage. Here's why this is where I've paused. Here's why this is the thing that's really jumping out at me. I don't want to be the product, like my future, who I'm becoming. I don't want to eventually be the product of verses 1 through 12 or verses 13 to 16. I don't want the life that those earlier verses will lead me to. I want the life that's the product of verses 17 to 18. Now, here's my thought to give you some context of my thinking here. So, in my opinion, we need about 80 to 90% of our vision, that whatever we want to do with our life and where we want to go in the future, we want about 80% of that to be in the future, to be in front of it. Like I've got this vision or aspiration or plan, call it whatever you want. I've got this dream that my 50s can be a great decade. So I look ahead toward where I'm going. I'm excited about where I'm heading towards. I've got my stuff that I'm referring to see how much closer I'm coming to that picture of the future that I want. However, that's not enough for me. I can't only have a future vision because I can get lazy, and I do get lazy, and apathy does set in. So I also need something more than a pretty picture to move me forward. I need a fire under my butt to get me inspired to move. I need to feel the heat of what will happen if I don't keep moving forward. So 10 to 20% of my vision needs to be behind me. I need to be reminded of the life that I don't really want to live. I need to be reminded that if I don't pursue my plans for my 50s and I just rest on my couch watching Netflix or whatever, then when I get to 60, I'm going to be a sorry mess. And that's not the life that I want to experience 10 years from now. 10 to 20% of my vision needs to be behind me, and it needs to scare me, like terrify me. Terrify me enough to snap me out of those lulls I can hit so that I choose to get inspired to live the life that I want to live and work toward the future that I want to experience. Okay, then that brings me to these two verses. So verses 1 through 16, that really makes up the 20% of the stuff that I want behind me. The stuff that I know that is a reality for me if I'm not careful. I don't want to let jealousy overtake me. Meaning, I don't want to look at other people's lives and see the glorious options that they have. I've got enough options of my own to aspire to and do something good enough about. If I let jealousy overtake me, I'm going to miss the options, the opportunities that I actually have, and I'll never grow. Jealousy will lead me to a place where I don't want to go at the end of this decade. I also don't want the life that selfishness leads me to, meaning I don't want to live a life surrounded by broken or shallow relationships. I want my relationships with my wife and my kids to mean something to me and to them. I also want my interactions within the places of community that I find myself to be a good exchange so that when I venture out of my house, I'm met by people who are actually glad to see me. I also don't want my mouth to be running off, meaning I don't want the limited opportunities for growth that a poor use of vocabulary will provide me with. I don't want to be surrounded by people who are careless with their words. I don't want my life to become the product of what angering people and starting arguments and swearing all the time and not being respectful will lead me to. That's not the life I want to be walking into at the end of this decade. So verses 1 through 16 is the 10 to 20% of my vision that is behind me to scare me that if I don't continue to move forward, I could end up like verses 1 through 16, and that's not what I want. So the vision that's in front of me includes verses 17 to 18. At the end of this decade, I want my life to be the product of a life lived by God's wisdom. I want God's wisdom to be the guiding light of how I live my life, because it's going to bring me to a future that I'm actually going to appreciate. If you and I allow ourselves to be guided and shaped by God's wisdom, this is what it can look like, okay? This passage describes God's wisdom as pure, peace-loving, gentle at all times, willing to yield to others, full of mercy, doing good deeds, not playing favorites. It's a life of sincerity, which could also be called a life of integrity. And what will happen if I'm to live a life that's governed by God's wisdom? I mean, what's the product of that? If jealousy leads to a life of squander, never taking advantage of your own opportunities, if a loose tongue leads to a life of arguments, low social standing, not being taken seriously, having low influence, if selfishness leads to shallow or no relationships and a life you really don't want, if those are the products of living without wisdom, products that are among the options that are in front of all of us can make choices that will take us toward becoming products of those actions and those choices and lifestyles that lead us down to places we don't want to be. All of us are at risk of having these lives that are led without God's wisdom, and then the resulting future that will lead us to. So what's the product of being governed by God's wisdom? Where is that leading us? It's found in the last verse. Living a life governed by God's wisdom, which is summarized a little in verse 17, means that our lifestyle is the lifestyle of a peacemaker. That's how it's summarized in verse 18. And the lifestyle of a peacemaker lead to its own product. A lifestyle of a peacemaker leads to the future experience of being surrounded by things that are considered righteous, right relationships that we enjoy and are fulfilled by, a right relationship with God so that our ultimate future hope is in the second coming and resurrection. And even our near future of like the next decade is also something that we can be hopeful about. Verses 17 to 18 really just give us a summary, but it's a good summary of what a life being governed by God's wisdom can look like. Let's take a moment to very briefly look at each one of these points. Here goes. Let's look at the word pure. Purity usually refers to a life without sin, a life that doesn't do things that will hurt a friendship with God, doesn't hurt your relationship with other people. It's the opposite of living a double life with skeletons in the closet. It's a life that when we become aware of things that we're doing that hurt relationship with God and others, or we're doing things that are self-destructive, then pursuing a life of purity is pursuing a life committed to working on overcoming those things, life of repentance. Purity is honesty, mostly in your relationship with God. Don't fake it with God. Be real with God. Let him forgive you. Let him help you stand back up on your feet and get you moving forward in the right direction again. Peace-loving. I don't think this needs much explanation. The opposite of this would be waggling our tongues, not avoiding arguments, putting our own interests first, and taking what we want from others. The opposite would be objectifying others and not treating them as equal persons. I mean, for the most part, it's being kind, it's staying humble, and it includes self-sacrifice. Gentle at all times. Well, good luck with this one. The older I get, the more I find I'm having more grumpy moments, mostly because I'm tired or I'm just in pain because I'm kind of wearing out. I find that the more I'm tuned into my own struggles, the less I'm tuned into wondering how other people are experiencing me. Gentleness is being aware of how another person is experiencing you, and then giving them an experience that won't hurt them, but may actually help them somehow. Willing to yield to others in the household texts in the New Testament, those texts that talks about husband and wives and children. This can be considered mutual submission. Sometimes I lead, sometimes you lead. Sometimes my needs get met, sometimes others' needs get met. Sometimes it's important for me to get out of the way. It's also recognizing authority. Police, superiors, crossing guards, bosses, you name it. People who have positions that put us in a one-down relationship will be yielded to if you're attempting to live a life of wisdom. Because the lack of yielding eventually produces a life of tickets and fines and jail time, bad reputation, with no influence, and a community that you walk into that's not welcoming to you. You feel foreign, you feel like an alien in your own neighborhood because you are not yielding to others. Full of mercy. Grace is being given something that you don't deserve. Get to mercy in a second. I'm going to start with grace. For example, God gives us his love and invites us to spend eternity with him, even though we don't deserve it, because we rejected him in Genesis and we crucified him on the cross in the Gospels. God gives us what we don't deserve, namely eternity, friendship with him, and that's good. Mercy is the opposite. Mercy is not getting what we do deserve. Grace is getting what we don't deserve, and it's good. Mercy is not getting what we do deserve, when that thing that we deserve is really bad. Where we deserve to be punished, punishment is withheld. So what about you? There are so many people around you that have wronged you somehow. Are you showing mercy by withholding judgment? Are you showing mercy by not escalating with them when they do something wrong to you? Good deeds. We've talked about this last week. We don't need to talk about it anymore. Not playing favorites. I think that that's come up already before. It's a life of sincerity, or I could also call that integrity. The word sincere in the text can also be thought of as living a life of integrity. If we're sincere, we're not living a double life. We're living in honesty. We don't have relationships simply because we're using them to get ahead. Our relationships are as real as they can be. We're in touch with our own values, and they're informing our aspirations and goals. So we're sincere about who we are, and we're also sincerely trying to connect with the real version of whoever it is we're trying to connect with, our friends. We're not being fake. We're actually being real with each other and honest. Okay, that's a brief summary. This kind of guidance, this kind of self-imposed structure, this kind of lifestyle results in something. It results in a future life that you actually want to live. It results in a future life that minimizes feelings of regret and shame. It results in you creating safety in your community so that people receive you well. You create the world as a safe place for you when you're guided by God's wisdom. It results in a future life that you want to live, and ultimately with God in eternity. If I want to arrive at the kind of life that I will enjoy living in the future, then living according to God's wisdom right now is going to help me to get there. And it is the same with you. If I reject God's wisdom and I choose to let my tongue loose, be led by jealousy, and pursue selfishness, that will get me to a life that I don't want to experience. I would have nothing to look forward to, and that would be the same as you. God's wisdom puts us on a path of life, a life we want to live here, and a life that we can look forward to in eternity. Okay, well, that's how I have interpreted this passage. It's what's jumping out to me. I secretly included the entire chapter, even though I just read the 2 verses. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you this week and hearing your interpretation, what you came up with. So that's it from me to you for now. Would you please like? Would you please share? Would you please subscribe? Would you also please ask for the link? We meet 2 times, Sunday at 10:30 at 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, it's just for men. For community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others and also with God. I'll see you next time.